Hey, RetconRaider here. Snapshot Games has released an awful lot of information about the setting that Phoenix Point will be taking place in. There are 20 stories in total, covering events that span over millennia, all leading up to the game's distinct post-apocalyptic setting. My previous videos were focused on the individual stories, but this time I'd like to look at all the stories together. Once you read everything back to back, some new patterns and clues start to emerge, leading to some potentially interesting conclusions. So today, I thought I'd sit down and try to assemble all of the stories into one grand timeline. To reflect on everything we've learned so far, and to speculate on how everything might fit together. Now, this will retread some familiar territory, but don't worry, I've supplemented the video with a lot of new observations and speculation. With 20 stories to talk about, this is going to take a while, so I think we'd better get started. Our timeline begins roughly 2.5 million years ago, during the Pliocene epoch. According to information we received in The Tomb of the Phoenix, the Earth was once ruled by a race of intelligent hominids who evolved alongside humanity. They built majestic cities, advanced art and culture, and squabbled with each other about how to treat the primitive Homo sapiens, their distant genetic cousins. But all this came to an end when their scientists discovered the existence of a trans-Neptunian planet, which they named Yuggoth. Yuggoth was revealed to be a planet that follows an elliptical orbit around our Sun, on a plane perpendicular to that of the rest of the planets in our solar system, only passing near the other planets of our solar system once every few millennia. A fragment broke from this planet while it briefly passed near our own, which hurtled through space and clipped our planet's moon before impacting the Earth's surface, near Antarctica. The destruction wrought by the impact was devastating, sending out mountain-sized tidal waves that destroyed many of the ancient cities and incited a holy war among those who survived. As their war raged on, they slowly became aware of the true threat, a fungal being that had accompanied the fragment to Earth and was now steadily spreading through our oceans. This fungal creature infected native species, including some of the hominids, transforming them into hideous, mutated monstrosities, and bringing the ancient civilization to the cusp of extinction. As one final act of defiance, the ancient race created a poison that they used to cripple the invader from Yuggoth, destroying themselves in the process. The fungal entity fell dormant, the hominids died out, and Homo sapiens thrived. Millions of years later, in 787 AD, a group of Vikings passing near the Isle of Portland came under the influence of an otherworldly entity hidden deep beneath our oceans. They began to change, developing scaly rashes as this god of the sea whispered to them in an unfamiliar language. One of the Vikings was left behind, growing sicker as he continued to mutate, his body covered in scales and hair and his organs changing in ways that allowed him to survive in the deepest, darkest depths of the ocean. Other settlers who encountered him also contracted his strange illness, but none survived the mutations that came with it, and the Vikings soon withdrew to a life of voluntary solitude. Though a short-lived affair with a local villager resulted in the birth of a child. His lover died, claimed by the same strange disease, but his child was taken in by his late lover's village where it thrived, and over the ensuing generations, more and more children were born, each of them sharing in his mutated bloodline. The old Viking lived for centuries, another side effect of his strange mutation, remaining on the Isle of Portland for the rest of his life. His numerous children practically worshipped him, his secret passed down from parent to child, but kept jealously guarded from outsiders. Centuries later, in 1846, a similar plague befell the remote town of Lyme, located along the Manoray River. Much like the disease that ravaged the coasts of the Isle of Portland 2 millennia earlier, this plague mutated the people it infected. But many of them survived the changes this time, and those who did reveled in it, forming a secretive cult that possibly marked the origins of the disciples of Anu. In 1937, rumors emerged of an uncharted island sighted in the Bellingshausen Sea, off the coast of Antarctica. A research expedition was assembled by Boston University, and they discovered that this mysterious island was the final resting place of the prehistoric species of hominids, built as a monument to their ultimate sacrifice millions of years earlier. While exploring these ruins, some of the researchers were exposed to a strange mist. And soon afterwards, some of their number vanished, only to return that night as strange mutated things. These creatures set upon the other researchers with a mindless, bloody fury, slaughtering many of their number. In the end, the few survivors fled back to the mainland, where their terrifying tale may have inspired the creation of the Phoenix Working Group, which evolved into the UN-funded Phoenix Project just a few years later, in 1945. This organization was dedicated to researching and preparing for the possibility of catastrophic contact with a hostile alien ecology. In the early 1970s, the Phoenix Project funded 2 missions to the Moon to investigate large impact sites on its surface. The first mission, dubbed Phoenix 1, investigated the Mare Imbrium, the Sea of Showers. Although they discovered nothing of note, information from the Soviet-led Luna program prompted them to launch a second mission in 1973. This time to investigate the Tsiolkovsky crater on the far side of the Moon. This mission proved much more fruitful, discovering a massive piece of the meteor that had struck Earth over 2 million years earlier. Cursory investigation quickly revealed that this fragment was also from Yuggoth, and it carried the same fungal entity that had infected Earth during the Pliocene epoch. 2 of the 3 Phoenix Point operatives were infected, rapidly mutating despite their safety precautions. Feeling the otherworldly entity attempting to influence their minds, the 2 infected operatives killed themselves. Around the same time, 2 men in the United States somehow astrally projected themselves to the planet Yuggoth, as it once again passed close to Earth. The 2 men glimpsed an alien city, and came into psychic contact with one of the massive things that lived there. This contact ended poorly, killing one of them and traumatizing the other. The survivor was subsequently debriefed by the Phoenix Project operatives in 1978. In 1986, the United States officially withdrew their funding from the Phoenix Project, after the Committee on Governmental Efficiency and Supplementary Projects determined that the project was a threat to national security. The United Nations continued to fund the Phoenix Project, but in a drastically diminished capacity. In 1995, the old mutant Viking living in the Isle of Portland continued to mutate, finally changing so drastically that he could no longer survive on dry land. His most recent descendant, sharing a profound psychic connection with him, felt compelled to join him and hurled herself into the ocean. Around the same time, in the late 20th century, a European explorer and his young guide discovered some ancient ruins in the Peruvian rainforest, near the Piura River. Discovering a strange statue, the explorer cut away some of the fungal growths obscuring its features, despite his guide's protests, prompting a massive fungal creature in the ruins to claim them both. Around the same time, a land surveyor named Paul Hatchell visited the secretive town of Lyme in hopes of filling in some gaps in the government records. Stumbling upon a strange gathering at the local church, he stole 2 pages from their holy book and was pursued by angry cultists and more monstrous things. Paul was captured and somehow stripped of his memories, and the cultists, now identified as worshippers of Anu, attempted to absorb Paul into their group, instead prompting him to commit suicide. The pages he had stolen were smuggled out of Lyme by another escapee. It's possible that they were later delivered to the Phoenix Project, explaining how the organization may have gotten a copy of some of the cult's Gospel of the Exalted. Now things get a bit muddier as we move into the 21st century. We have very few hard dates to work with, so the most I can do is try to use context clues to guess at where many of these events fit in. We know that the Pandora virus first came into the public eye in 2022, discovered in the melting permafrost of our polar ice caps. The scientific community was initially excited by this discovery, but soon grew concerned as it began spreading into the oceans unchecked. Soon afterwards, people began contracting the Pandora virus, leading to panic in several coastal regions. Perhaps in response to the discovery of this strange new virus, India began working on the Pokhran-3 nuclear program in May of 2023. This quickly led to renewed tensions between India and Pakistan. In the early 2020s, Major Tobias West, a veteran of 2 tours in Syria, retired from the U.S. Army and founded Vanadium Inc. A security and technology firm, Vanadium Inc. quickly developed a respected reputation for providing security personnel who protected transoceanic cargo shipments and oil rigs. This put them among the first to encounter the strange mutants being created by the Pandora virus, with the first contact possibly being what is referred to as the Big Egg incident that took place in 2027 on the Halpine McAllister oil rig. Around the same time, the Phoenix Project was revealed to the public. Facing public ridicule and new heights of international scrutiny, the United Nations officially shut them down. Although the Phoenix Project continued to operate in secrecy, they lost several of their files around this time. Now aware of the alien threat that was rising from the oceans, Vanadium started focusing on gathering research on the Pandora virus. Learning of a small company called Enyosec that had discovered something frozen in the ice of Antarctica, Vanadium mobilized a team of soldiers to investigate. Joined by a former Phoenix Project operative, the group traveled to an Enyosec research facility near McMurdo Station, where they discovered that they were studying a Pandora virus mutant, possibly a crabman. This mutant had awoken after being thawed, slaughtering everyone in the facility, and the Vanadium team suffered heavy casualties before killing the creature. Discovering that they had been infected by the strange mist that was now flooding through the facility, the operatives decided to immolate the building with napalm to prevent it from spreading any further, killing themselves in the process. Reports of similar infections began spreading in 2028, beginning in Alaska and Canada, but quickly spreading to other countries. Mutated sea life began appearing in coastal regions. A sushi restaurant in California was shut down after their fresh-caught fish and shrimp began mutating before their eyes. A creature emerged from the ruins in Balchik, implanting people with a strange parasitic symbiote that linked them to a hive mind and began repurposing their flesh into new mutant hybrids. Around this time, Vanadium Inc. began more aggressively recruiting personnel as part of their new Jericho initiative. In the years that followed, a cloud of unnatural mist began forming over the oceans, and ships that ventured into it would often vanish without a trace. Some of them reporting that they were being approached by a massive object just before communications were lost. The nations of the world began researching the strange new mist, but they were reluctant to work together. After an American research vessel vanished while studying the mist, news agencies began speculating that it was sabotaged by Chinese agents or destroyed by a Russian long-range torpedo. The United States and China both began assembling armadas along the edges of the mist that had formed over the Pacific Ocean, with both countries condemning the other for what they saw as acts of aggression. In 2032, the Indian government decided that the virus was actually a bioweapon developed by a Pakistani research lab. Orders were handed down to initiate a nuclear strike against a lab in Pakistan that they had incorrectly identified as the point of origin. But the launch was aborted after the timely intervention of 2 Phoenix Project operatives. They disabled the Indian government's nuclear launch system, but implied that the Phoenix Project was stockpiling other nuclear weaponry just in case. Growing frustrated with the lack of scientific cooperation between nations, a small group of independent scientists based out of Moscow began a crowd-funded research effort. They quickly raised enough funds to assemble a functional lab, and began researching both the Pandora virus and the mysterious mist, releasing all of their findings to the public. Dubbed the Firebird Initiative in reference to the supposedly defunct Phoenix Project, their research quickly progressed thanks to anonymous informants who provided them with classified information and stolen proprietary technology. They were quickly condemned by other governments for their use of this information, regardless of the results they achieved. And they drew even more criticism after publicizing their experiments involving the introduction of the Pandora virus into human stem cells. Interestingly, the Firebird Initiative's research attracted the attention of several prominent groups, including Vanadium Inc., the Disciples of Anu, and the Phoenix Project. Unfortunately, their research efforts came to an abrupt halt after an eco-terrorist group detonated an improvised explosive device outside of their lab, killing 2 of the researchers and badly injuring another 2. The Firebird Initiative was put on indefinite hold. In the wake of the collapse of the Firebird Initiative, the mist began washing over islands and coastal regions, leading to an event that was later dubbed the First Mist. It began slowly at first, with incidents like the one at Cape Bay Naval Museum, where the staff and patrons vanished over the period of a week, or the incident on the island of Sanuya, just off the coast of Norway, where the entire population was devoured by a massive tentacled creature lurking just off the coast. As the mist began moving steadily inland, thousands of people were seen simply walking into the ocean, while others were mutated into strange new things. Countries panicked and numerous coastal cities were evacuated. The chain of events here becomes particularly hazy, but based on what limited information we have available, it appears that international tensions continued to rise, ultimately leading to World War III. A tremendous amount of research and technology is lost as a result of this senseless war, further reducing the chance of stopping the steady advance of the Pandora virus. In the wake of the war and the continued spread of the mist, independent California secedes from the new American Republic. A woman named Lisa Owens develops a symbiotic relationship with the Pandora virus, curing her terminal cancer, and somehow granting her the ability to pass this gift on to others. This brings her to the attention of the American military, but before they can detain her, she is intercepted by agents of the Disciples of Anu, who wish to use her genetic gift to help them control the Pandora virus and safely mutate their bodies. Vanadium Inc., now known as New Jericho, establishes heavily fortified military camps and begins more active recruitment efforts to further advance their weapons research programs. Starting around 2052, New Jericho begins actively broadcasting recruitment messages and pro-humanity propaganda to the dwindling number of surviving cities around the world. In Greece, the mist continues to flood out over the mainland, pushing the remnants of the Firebird Initiative to develop a domed habitat on Mount Lycabettus. They are opposed by the Grecian government, who are struggling to keep the populace calm in the face of an extinction-level event. The citizens of Athens are directed to ineffective safe zones, where they are left to die, while the remaining government officials attempt to flee the city with all of the remaining emergency supplies. The Firebird Initiative, now known as Sanhedrion, rebuff a missile strike on their newly built habitat and respond aggressively, sending a strike team into Athens and wiping out the remaining government holdouts, claiming their equipment and supplies to help support their new habitat. As they withdraw from Athens, the city is overwhelmed by the mist, killing or mutating anyone who remained. The domed habitat is kept safe by a combination of elevation and new prototype devices that can repel the mist. At this point, it becomes evident that something has gone wrong inside the Phoenix Project. Sleeper cells are never activated and their plans are never put into motion. Agents are left stranded in the field. And that brings us to the beginning of the game in the year 2057. The Pandora virus has washed over much of the world, leaving only a few surviving pockets of humanity. Most of these surviving havens are controlled by one of 3 main factions: the Disciples of Anu, New Jericho, or Sanhedrion. A small number of independent havens exist, one of them being Phoenix Point, one of the sleeper cells established by the Phoenix Project. The sleeper agents at Phoenix Point are finally activated, but quickly discover that they cannot communicate with any of the other cells. With few other options available to them, they begin making efforts to find out what happened to the rest of the Phoenix Project. And everything beyond that is entirely in the player's hands. So, there you have it. a timeline that paints us a vivid picture of how the world ended up in such a sorry state. Looking at all the stories back to back makes it easier to see how everything links together, and allows us to pick out some prominent details of the setting that we may have otherwise overlooked. There are some pretty sizable gaps, most notably surrounding the events of World War III and the mysterious Big Egg incident, but I suspect that we'll find out more about those with the final stories that will be included in the official Phoenix Point novella next year. There are still a few things that I'd like to talk about, but again, this video has already run long enough. So for now, I think we've reached a good stopping point. Until next time, this is RetconRaider, signing off. Thanks for listening. Oh, and remember, although I do love talking about Phoenix Point, you can keep up with all the latest news by visiting the official website, or the crowdfunding campaign over on Fig. Links are in the description.